and welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower your sex life and, of course, relationships. And today, what will be our topic, Mr. Mick?
Yes, this is What is Virtue Meets Vanity, or a tale of two worlds colliding. So, if I'm going to introduce this, I'll introduce a look at what's called the nun and the narcissist. So, it's an instructive article by Earl Smith entitled The Nun and the Narcissist Two Diverging Species. So, to start this off, let's define our terms first. So, defining a nun. A nun is a member of a religious community of women typically living a life of prayer, work, and service to others. Nuns take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and often live in a convent or monastery with other sisters. They may be a part of a specific religious order, such as the Sisters of Mercy or the Dominican Sisters, or they may be a part of a more general Catholic sisterhood. Nuns often engage in various forms of ministry, such as teaching, nursing, or social work, and may also be involved in prayer, meditation, and spiritual direction. Despite their dedication to their faith and their community, nuns are often misunderstood and stereotyped and are frequently seen as being repressed, rigid, and unworldly. Defining a narcissist is a person who has an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for admiration, and a lack of sympathy for others. Narcissists often have an exaggerated sense of their own abilities and accomplishments and may be preoccupied with their appearance, status, and reputation. They may also be prone to grandiosity, seeking to impress others with their wealth, power, or achievements. However, beneath their confident exterior, narcissists often struggle with feelings of insecurity, vulnerability, and shame. They may be manipulative and controlling, using their charm and charisma to get what they want from others. Narcissists can be difficult to deal with as they often lack sympathy and may be unwilling to listen to others or consider their perspectives. Despite their many flaws, narcissists can also be charismatic and persuasive, making it difficult for others to see through their facade. In conclusion, research is showing that the relationships between men and women are diverging along these two lines as nun and narcissist.
So, Mr. Mick, what is the striking divergence between young men and women?
Men and women have always struggled, but in the Jane Eyre world, young people were looking for a mate, desired marriage and family, and looked forward to building a life together. Jane Eyre, the novel by Charlotte Bronte, is considered a product of the Victorian era. The novel was published in 1847 during the reign of Queen Victoria and reflects many of the social, cultural, and literary trends of the time. The Victorian era was a period of significant social change and cultural transformation in Britain, marked by industrialization, urbanization, and the rise of the middle class. The era was also characterized by a strong sense of morality, social hierarchy, and gender roles, which are all reflected in Jane Eyre. The novel's themes of social class, morality, and the struggles of women in a patriarchal society are all typical of Victorian literature. The character of Jane Eyre herself, a strong willed and independent young woman who defies social conventions, is all product of the Victorian era's changing attitudes towards women's roles and rights. Jane Eyre is considered a classic of Victorian literature, and its themes, characters, and settings are all deeply rooted in the cultural and social context of the time. All these elements are now sounding quite quaint and old fashioned, thus, a consideration of how society has departed from divergence between men and women has transpired. As Earl states in his Substack article, in contemporary discourse on gender, relationships, and generational shifts, a striking divergence is emerging between young men and women, one that suggests not just differences in perspective, but a fundamental mismatch in values, priorities, and social expectations. The divergence particularly impacts members of Generation Z, and the patterns that are emerging are difficult to ignore. Women frequently describe young men as immature, self-centered, and obsessed with a hyper-masculine ideal. Men might be overreacting to social pressure because they are actually suffering rather severely. Men are facing a crisis in modern society, with many struggling to find their place and purpose in a world that is rapidly changing. Despite being the dominant gender for centuries, men are increasingly emasculated and marginalized, with traditional masculine roles and expectations being challenged and redefined. Many men are struggling to cope with the loss of their traditional breadwinner status as women's participation in the workforce has increased and the concept of a single income household has become less common. Additionally, the rise of feminism and this tag Me Too movement has led to a greater awareness of the ways in which men have historically held power and privilege, and many men are feeling guilty, ashamed, and uncertain about how to navigate this new landscape. As a result, are experiencing higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide, and are often struggling to form meaningful connections with others and find a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Women are adjusting to contemporary men since to females, masculinity has come to mean not strength or responsibility, but bullying, bravado, and a lack of emotional depth. As a result, many young women gravitate toward older men, often baby boomers who came of age in the social revolutions of the 1960s and 70s. These men, shaped by a different era, often display a more intellectual curiosity, a greater emotional openness, and at the very least, a more refined sense of social etiquette. At the heart of this divide is a growing indifference among young women toward traditional institutions such as marriage and family. When asked about long term commitments, many respond with some version of a lifetime with him? I don't think so. It's not just merely a rejection of specific partners, but the entire premise that modern young men are suitable life companions. Many young women prioritize their careers, friendships, and personal fulfillment over the prospect of marriage or motherhood, partly because they do not see viable partners who share their values or their vision for the future. In conclusion, men and women sexual partners as inadequate and are not serious long term partners.
So, Mr. Mick, what is the striking? No, I mean, what are the diverging values and life aspiration between men and women?
One of the most defining characteristics of Generation Z is the stark contrast in the values and life aspirations of young men and women. Women tend to see their futures in terms of self actualization, professional achievement, meaningful social engagement. Many aspire to careers that give them purpose, financial independence, and the ability to contribute to causes they care about. They are more likely than men to prioritize education, activism, and emotional intelligence as key aspects of personal growth. For many, a fulfilling life does not revolve around marriage and children, but around experiences, achievements, and social impact. Young men, in contrast, often display a more individualistic and self serving worldview. Many view success through the lens of material gain, status, and personal freedom. Rather than seeing higher education as a path to opportunity, some young men regard it as unnecessary or even as an ideological trap designed to indoctrinate them into liberal values. A growing number gravitate toward online subcultures that emphasize financial independence through non traditional means, cryptocurrency, influencer culture, or even anti establishment movements that reject mainstream career paths. This divergence in values is particularly evident in attitudes towards relationships. Young women increasingly seek emotional depth, intellectual compatibility, and egalitarian partnerships. Many refuse to settle for relationships in which they are expected to be caretakers or emotional laborers for men who lack self awareness or ambition. Young men, on the other hand, often embrace a more transactional view of relationships, either seeking casual connections without emotional entanglement or expecting traditional gender roles without embodying the responsibilities that come with them. This fuels a cycle of frustration, with young women feeling that men are emotionally stunted and young men feeling that women have unrealistic expectations. In conclusion, in terms of sex, men and women are not responsibly connecting. They are disconnecting and leading to historical trends that worked: relationships, marriage, and children.
So, Mr. Mick, what is the growing gender divide?
This Disconnect is particularly pronounced in attitudes towards dating, sex, and marriage. Many young women of Generation Z are pulling away from traditional romantic and sexual expectations, often as a reaction to the perceived immaturity and entitlement of young men. This movement is not unique to the West. It is mirrored globally, particularly in South Korea, where young women are leading a social shift known as the 4B movement, short for the four no's: no dating, no sex, no marriage, no childbirth. South Korean women who embrace the 4B philosophy reject relationships with men entirely, citing systemic misogyny, unfair expectations of emotional labor, and the economic burdens associated with marriage and child rearing. While this movement is rooted in South Korea's unique gender dynamics, its core ideas resonate with many young women in the West who feel disillusioned with modern dating culture. In Western contexts, this manifests in the rise of low effort dating, where women increasingly refuse to entertain relationships with men who do not meet a high standard of emotional intelligence, ambition, and maturity. Many young women report feeling exhausted by online dating, where ghosting, casual encounters, and a lack of commitment have become the norm. The traditional markers of romantic progression, serious relationships, engagements, and marriage are now viewed with skepticism. Meanwhile, young men often take a different approach. While some express frustration that modern women seem too picky or unrealistic in their dating expectations, others disengage from the dating world altogether, either voluntarily or out of frustration. The rise of the men going their own way, the MGTOW movement, exemplifies this trend, with many young men rejecting relationships as too burdensome or an unnecessary distraction from their personal goals. Some turn to transactional models of relationships, such as casual hookups, sugar dating, or even AI generated companionship, further distancing themselves from traditional commitments. In conclusion, there is a worldwide disconnect between the sexes, and not surprisingly, population growth is down dramatically.
What is the impact of the education gap, Mr. Meg?
One of the most striking factors driving this divergence is the growing gap in educational attainment between young men and women. For years, women have been enrolling in and graduating from college at significantly higher rates than men. Currently, women earn about 60% of bachelor's degrees in the US, and this trend shows no signs of reversing. In contrast, male enrollment in higher education has stagnated or even declined. This educational imbalance has profound implications for relationships. Women with college degrees often seek partners who are at least equally educated, not only for intellectual compatibility, but also for economic stability. However, as the number of college educated men shrinks relative to college educated women, the dating pool for high achieving women becomes increasingly limited. Many are reluctant to date down in terms of education and ambition, leading to a growing number of single, career focused women who see marriage as an unnecessary or even undesirable commitment. Meanwhile, many young men, particularly those who do not pursue higher education, struggle with feelings of disillusionment, economic stagnation, social alienation. Without college degrees, they face limited job prospects in an economy that increasingly favors knowledge based work over traditional blue collar labor. This fuels resentment, further deepening the divide between the sexes. In conclusion, the crisis for men is that they are less likely to seek sexual partners who are financially better off than themselves.
And Mr. Mick, what is a political and cultural divide?
Politics plays a significant role in this growing gender divide. For many young women, liberalism is a moral framework that emphasizes empathy, justice, and collective well being. They see their political beliefs as an extension of their capacity to care about others. In contrast, many young men view such concerns as trivial, idealistic, or even weak. They often perceive liberal values as naive distractions from personal ambition and individual success. I would add a phrase of caution here. There is a saying which states, if you are not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. But if you are still a liberal in your 30s, you have no brain. The saying might be a bit harsh, but youthful idealism is often as we age, and reality in many ways begins to sink in. In any case, the separation of male and female sex partners can be characterized. This dynamic can be characterized as the divide between the nun and the narcissist. The nun represents the self sacrificing, socially conscious young woman who strives for meaning beyond herself. The narcissist represents the young man who sees the world primarily in terms of his own advantage. The result is a generational impasse where both sexes find it increasingly difficult to relate to one another, let alone build lasting relationships. If the previous saying about liberals seems harsh, labeling an entire generation of young men as narcissistic is less brutal. If this trend continues, the implications for society are profound. A declining interest in marriage and family will reshape demographics, economics, and cultural expectations. Moreover, if young men and women continue to diverge in values, education, and aspirations, the social fabric itself may fray, leaving behind isolated individuals rather than cohesive communities. The question that remains is whether this divide is permanent or whether a new synthesis can emerge, one in which masculinity and femininity evolve in ways that make partnership more appealing and sustainable for both sides. Until that happens, the nun and the narcissist will remain on separate paths, unable to find common ground. In conclusion, contemporary society is at a crisis when males and females are not sexually satisfied with one another enough to marry and have children.
So, how did marriage rate increase with the introduction of Christianity in the Roman Empire when marriage and childbirth rates decline?
The separate paths of nun and the narcissist is an echo of what happened historically. Christianity increased sexual satisfaction, leading to rising marital rates and more children in the early centuries of the Common Era. The institution of marriage has long been a cornerstone of society, influencing social structures, family dynamics, and cultural norms. In the Roman Empire, marriage practices evolved significantly over time, particularly with the advent of Christianity. We can explore how the introduction of Christianity impacted marriage rates during a period when both marriage and childbirth rates were experiencing a decline. By examining the social, cultural context of the Roman Empire, the teachings of Christianity, the subsequent changes in marriage practices, we can better understand this transformative era. To appreciate the changes brought about by Christianity, we first need to understand the social and cultural landscape of the Roman Empire. At its height, the Roman Empire was one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in history, encompassing a vast territory across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The empire was characterized by a diverse population with varying customs and beliefs, including pagan religions that emphasized different values regarding marriage and family life. The Roman Republic was characterized by virtue, marriage, and a growing population. Once the empire expanded, though, slaves were readily available and took over most of the hardy work required by yeoman farmers who no longer needed large families to sustain themselves. During the early years of the empire, marriage was primarily viewed as a social contract, often arranged for political or economic reasons. Love was not always a primary consideration. As a result, marriage rates fluctuated and the institutions began to show signs of decline by the time Christianity began to spread. By the first few centuries of the Common Era, several factors contributed to declining marriage and birth rates within the Roman Empire. Economic instability, wars, and social upheaval created a challenging environment for families. Additionally, the growing influence of philosophical schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism led to a shift in values. Many individuals began to prioritize personal happiness and fulfillment, which often conflicted with the traditional expectations of marriage. As the Roman Empire experienced these societal shifts, Christianity began to take root. Emerging from a small sect in Judea, Christianity spread rapidly across the empire, gaining followers from various social classes. The religion presented a new way of life, offering hope and a sense of community in a world rife with uncertainty. Christianity's teachings on marriage were revolutionary. The early Christian church promoted the idea that marriage was not just a social contract, but a sacred union blessed by God. Conclusion: Christianity was a revolutionary idea in a declining and decaying world, just as in contemporary society.
So, Mr. Mick, what is the influence of Christian teachings on marriage?
In this regard, we can discuss several things that are important. The Christian doctrines reshaped the understanding of marriage in the Roman Empire. Some key teachings included the sacramental nature of marriage, monogamy and fidelity, the role of women, procreation and family. The turning point for Christianity came in the early 4th century with the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, Common Era, which legalized the religion. This shift allowed Christianity to flourish openly and led to its eventual establishment as a state religion under Emperor Theodosius I. As Christianity gained prominence, laws were enacted to reflect Christian values regarding marriage. With the rise of Christianity and the shift in societal values, marriage rates began to increase. There are numerous accounts from this period that illustrate the changing attitudes towards marriage. For example, writings from the early church fathers like Augustine of Hippo highlight the importance of marriage as a means to achieve holiness. He argued that marriage should be pursued for the sake of mutual love and the well being of the family rather than merely as a social obligation. Such perspectives resonated with many, reinforcing the idea that marriage was not only acceptable, but desirable. The increase in marriage rates led to a transformation in family structures within the Roman Empire. And this shift had broader implications for society. As families became more cohesive, they contributed to a sense of community and social stability. Despite the positive changes brought about by Christianity, the transition was not without challenges. Some segments of the population resisted these new values, clinging to older traditions and customs. Additionally, the rise of monasticism introduced another layer of complexity. Monastic communities, which emphasized celibacy and abstaining from marriage, presented an alternative lifestyle that challenged conventional views of family. In conclusion, some in society became nuns or monks for the kingdom of God, while others abandoned narcissistic ways and were fruitful and multiplied in marriage.
So, Mr. Mick, how can we conclude this discussion of the nun and the narcissist and an historical solution to the problem?
The introduction of Christianity in the Roman Empire marked a significant turning point for marriage and family life. As marriage rates began to increase, the institution transformed from a mere social contract into a sacred union. Christian teachings emphasized love, fidelity, and mutual respect, reshaping societal norms and values. While challenges and resistance existed, the overall impact of Christianity on marriage was profound. The rise in marriage rates brought stability to families and communities, contributing to the long term success of the Christian faith in the empire. In conclusion, understanding this historical context allows us to appreciate the enduring influence of Christianity on marriage practices, a legacy that continues to answer issues of the nun and the narcissist in favor of a stable, vital institution today.
Certainly. Great episode, Mr. Mick. And as we are saying, virtue meets vanity, a tales of two worlds colliding explore the stark contrast between selflessness or self-obsession, morality and indulgence, humility and excess. So, Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, the Doctor of Digital podcast, and of course, the Idea to Author Coach, a Facebook group. Welcome to join for writers, aspiring writers who want to write books and to sell more books. You can also pick up a couple of my books that are available on Amazon, Burning America, and On Track Ian Hunter. Until next time, Deus Volt.
Yes, people. Also, I want to plug in our baby podcast, Mental Health 101, in its first season, people, with Mr. Mick, the Doctor of Digital. Please do support us wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. Mick, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Good to see you, my friend.
Moricon, people. See you soon.